Good morning to you. It's Friday morning. Welcome to nearly the weekend, and thank you for joining us for our Bible talk for today as we continue our adventure through the amazing book of Psalms, the Old Testament hymn book. Just to remind you where we're in today, we're in some of the best known and best loved words in the whole Bible, Psalm 8, very, very popular. Just to put you in context, there are 150 Psalms collected into 5 collections, we call 5 books. And Psalms 1 to 41 are book 1, so that's what we're in now. Of the ones we looked at so far, number 1 and 2 go together very, very well. But Psalms 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 are like what we call lament psalms. We've had those the last few days. But today we get something completely different. Today we get a hymn of praise. Because like I said, in the Psalms we get all sorts of different emotions. There's anger, there's frustration, there's sadness. But we also get joy, and today we have an unadulterated hymn of praise. It calls itself a psalm of David, so it's definitely written by David, more on that later. And it says to the leader according to the Gittith. Now it's thought that the Gittith is probably some musical term. No one knows what it is in fact, but it's thought to have been some kind of musical term. But anyway, let's get stuck in. Psalm 8. O Lord our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I can look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you've established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them little lower than God, and crowned them with glory and honour. You've given them dominion over the works of your hands, and put all things under their feet. All sheep and oxen, even the wild beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish in the sea, and whatsoever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, okay, firstly to say about this psalm, it's a psalm of praise, it's a song of praise to God, and it starts and ends with the greatness of God. O Lord our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. And it starts with that and it ends with that. So it's top and tail. It begins and it ends with the majesty and the praise of God. And then it goes on in the intervening verses to what you might say to unpack that a little. So in verses 1.5 into 2, he says, out of the mouths of babes and infants, you found the bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. Now, we can get sentimental about children at this point, and you can. It is true to say, having said that, that sometimes children have a fantastic way of putting things, and children have a very, very good way of cutting to the chase and getting straight to the point. I heard a lovely story a few years ago about a disabled boy, who went to a meeting once, a church meeting, at which people were arguing amongst themselves. And apparently this meeting was going on, and then this boy, as I gather, had special needs, just went, Our Father, who art in heaven. And apparently the whole place went silent. And children do have a way sometimes of putting things like that. Yes, we can over-sentimentalise them, and they can be dreadful, they can be difficult as well sometimes. But it is true to say that children often have a very good way of getting straight to the point. But I don't actually think these verses are really about children per se. I think it's really about the glory of God. And he's saying that God is so great that even out of the mouths of little people, God can create a bulwark against his enemies. Because the thrust of the psalm is really not so much about it is really about God, and about God's greatness, about God's majesty, and about God's sovereignty. And he's saying here that God, I think he's saying here that God is so great and so good that even out of the mouths of babes and infants, you can create a bulwark against your enemies. So again, you've got the glory of God, but God is so great that even somebody that's small can do great things for him. But then he goes on, and I think we have to remember at this point that David became a king, but David started out as a shepherd, which meant that David would have spent in Bethlehem. In case you're wondering, yes, it is because it's the town in David's town is born this day. And later we hear in the Christmas carols and so on that David came from Bethlehem, and David was a shepherd, which meant David would have spent a great deal of time out in the fields looking after his sheep during his life, because that's what he did. And I can imagine on what you might call a starry night. My vision here is the way I see it is David kind of lying on his back when the sheep have gone to bed or something, looking up at the skies, and then he looks at the stars, or in the distance, and so on. And he's basically saying, God, you're amazing, because you've got the whole universe. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers. So when he considers the whole universe that God's got to look after, what are mortals, he says, that you should be mindful of them? Mere human beings that you should seek them out. Effectively, he looks at the stars and he thinks, wow, and he says, when I consider all that you've made and all of this, what are human beings that you should be mindful of them? You've got the whole universe to look after, and yet you still look after little me, basically. So such is the greatness of God, that even though God's made the moon and the stars and the earth and everything else, God still has the time and the love to look out for the likes of you and me, which is fantastic. But then finally, in verses 5 to 8, he talks about what God's done with humanity. He says human beings have been made little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honour. And he's given them dominion over the works of his hands and put all things under their feet. In other words, God has made a beautiful world, and God has entrusted it to the humanity. Now, obviously, normally speaking, if someone trusts you with something, you take good care of it. God has given us dominion over the earth to do with it what we want. And I think there's a very important section here, really, because we are to look after the world. In the same way that if someone lends us something or gives us something, we should look after it. He's saying that human beings have been given dominion over the works of everything God has made. The sheep and oxen, the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish in the sea, and whatsoever walks in the paths of the sea. Everything in the air, everything in the sea, everything on land, we've been given dominion over it. And yet, it's been basically trusted to us. Therefore, we have a responsibility to look after it. And I think today, there's the conference about climate change and things going on at the moment. This is a fantastic reminder to us that God has entrusted the world to us. He's given us dominion over it. Therefore, it's been trusted to us. Therefore, we should look after it. And then the psalm ends as it started. O Lord, our God, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the world. So what this psalm is, it's a psalm of praise. It's a psalm of praise about the greatness of God. And he's saying that God is so great that even out of the mouths of little children, he can form a bulwark against his enemies. That God is so great that David can look at the stars and the sky and see all that God has made, and yet still be amazed because God still has time for the likes of you and me. And finally, he points out that God, in his infinite goodness and mercy, has trusted the world to us. He's given us dominion over it. And therefore, if we've been entrusted with something, we need to look after it. And this is the call to action for us, to make sure we look after the world that God's given us. Hope some of that makes sense. God bless you. Have a lovely day and a lovely weekend. May God be with you, and more on Monday.